Hello, everyone, and welcome to another video interview here at gamblingnews.com. I'm Stoyan Todorov, a co-editor at Gambling News, and today I'm being joined by Ilya Brovin, Chief Growth Officer at Sumsub, a company that specializes in identity verification, player risk profiling, and onboarding. Sumsub has been making its presence in gaming felt for a while now, and today we have the opportunity to speak with a person who is uniquely positioned to answer our questions regarding various aspects of the customer journey at online gaming sites at a time of rapid changes across the industry globally. Ilya, it's very good to have you here with us.
Stern, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great. And so I actually wanted to start with starting you off with a question about something that happened a couple of months back. I think in November, Sumsub introduced your full cycle platform featuring verification, anti-fraud, and compliance solutions. And we just wanted to ask you, what has led you to consider this platform as a viable business strategy, and why does the gambling industry needs that full cycle platform today?
Sure, I think that's a great question. Look, we've been working with multiple companies from different sectors for a very long time, offering solutions, as you mentioned, around onboarding, both for gaming industries and other industries like fintechs, like crypto. We've developed our transaction monitoring tool about a year and a half ago and have been successfully implementing it. What has been obvious to us for a long time, which has led us to develop these tools, is that when you try to identify people and identify threats just by looking at separate points of users' journey, you actually miss a lot of data. It's very hard to connect these points and fight for this way. And I think in gaming and gambling in particular, this is a place and an industry in which lots of fraud happens, not at the time of onboarding, but at other points in time. So we thought that this was actually the first and best use case to put this together in a comprehensive solution. And so, yeah, that's why we did it. Really, we already had most of the tools. We combined them together, and we also developed tailored scenarios and rules for this particular industry so that it all glues together.
I see. And yeah, well, indeed, there's been a lot going on in the industry right now, and AML and KYC checks have been at the core of what most gambling businesses do today. But as you mentioned, there is also things that happen past the onboarding stage as well. But do you think that companies fully appreciate actually the importance of these safeguards? And for example, has your company seen an increase in demand for tailored products that protect business operations from, let's say, regulatory actions due to not fully appreciating the complexity of what's needed to protect the business, as it were?
I mean, there are several questions to this, and I think these are exactly the right questions. So first of all, if you think about the industry, which happens actually in many industries as they go from offline to online, gives a lot of new opportunities, opens new market, but at the same time, it introduces a lot of new challenges around, the fact that you're not actually physically, the player is not physically present, you're not observing them in real life, gives the fraudsters much more ability to do what they want to do, and hence new tools and new approaches are required. So a lot of times the companies actually also go through a journey of understanding what those risks are and how to fight them. And at the same time, the regulators are also going through the same journey, because it's not correct, and you cannot apply the tools and the principles that worked in the offline world one-to-one to the online world. You need to adjust. So I think it's both the industry and the regulators are on this journey, and we are there to help them. So that's really why I think players are very well aware of the risks. They see these challenges and they are asking us for solutions. What they've been doing historically is using point solutions for different problems. They say, okay, we need to onboard a person compliantly. They do whatever is required technically, but it doesn't mean, say, they might protect themselves from regulatory compliance point of view, but not necessarily from risk mitigation. Mm-hmm. Then the user is onboarded and they conduct some activity. Again, they might be trying to catch them and monitor their behavior to catch if there's anything untoward going on, but it will be difficult to do it. But again, they employ different point solutions. And I think that's where it came to the realization between us and our clients that actually something more holistic and comprehensive would work much better. And there are also specific challenges for the gaming industry that don't necessarily exist in other industries. It's not about just ongoing about compliance from a point of view of AML or fraud management. There's also things like responsible gambling, for example, right? Where a legitimate user, they're not doing anything bad, but you need to be able to monitor their behavior to make sure they're not, as I say, gambling their pension away, right? That's the responsible aspect of it. And in order to do that efficiently and effectively, you need to have all of the data you have about the user from onboarding. And you also need to be able to identify when people, either with malice or or otherwise try to game the system. The most common types of fraud, the multi-accounting and so on, might allow them to circumvent some of these rules. And it's prudent on the side of operators to be able to actually monitor those rather than say, well, it's fine, whatever's going on, because the regulators are definitely paying much more attention to this.
Yes, they are, as exemplified by strings of enforcement actions, especially in Europe. There have been several big names suffering like heavy penalties, and this is an interesting point. I think, as you said, that the issue is multi-complex. On the one hand, there are issues with compliance from the perspective of social responsibility, and on the other hand, there are actual other added risks to the business where once they onboard customers, they also face risks. And it's almost, as you mentioned, as if the whole thing is a bit fragmented, and operators' attention tends to be a little fragmented as well. So there is an increase in, let's say, regulatory scrutiny on matters such as social responsibility. So we have to focus there, whereas we kind of going to turn a blind eye to the fraud that happens after. And right now, do you think that businesses are actually realizing the need to have a 360-degree solution to all of these challenges at the same time? Do you think that's as maybe perhaps in private conversations with business operators, do you hear more and more, for example, Ilya, we need to address our social responsibility, but we can't turn a blind eye to how some people or bad actors, because we can't really call them players perhaps, are trying to undermine operators. Is there some of that? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think you definitely see players, and we work with a lot of big ones that are trying to be as compliant and sort of proper as possible. And they do need tools for that. And they do come to us with individual sort of pain points. And when we show them that, in fact, you don't need to solve them individually, but you can actually get the full platform, a lot of them go like, aha, look, that's actually a much better approach rather than just trying to stitch up a lot of things. And the other thing, I say this quite often actually, is that, compliance, onboarding, things like that, they don't really make a business great, right?
Yeah.
Nobody ever says I have the best gaming business because I have the best compliance or KYC, right?
Yeah.
This is never a core part of the business. Your business should be building a brand, attracting customer, giving them great experience. However, you need to be in the background, be compliant. So I think that's part of the reason why some of these questions have been maybe of a second priority for the operators, and it's only natural. And so that's why we think we're there to actually take a lot of that pain and cost and effort from them, and also give them more than just the tool, because what we give, as we work with over 2,000 clients in different industries, crypto is a big industry we work with. Like gaming, I think it does attract a lion's share of people trying to defraud it, which means that we actually, through the whole global onboarding machine, we see lots of fraud patterns happening. So actually, if any provider is trying to do something on their own, they're actually, operator, they're actually limited to whatever their scope is, and they can only catch it when it happens to them. But with us, sometimes we can see some fraud patterns, happening before they come to this particular period. So when they come, we already know, look, this is a network of bad actors in some jurisdiction. We're able to piece them together via various means, even though, for example, they might be using legitimate documents and those might be real people, but in fact, they form a part of a fraud network. And we are able to catch that before they attack a particular client.
I see. That's very interesting. That's very interesting because I'm thinking of another thing here. From when you talk about fraudsters and perhaps those real people are mostly associated with AML, perhaps. So I was just wondering, do you think that so when operators run into trouble today and regulators such as the UK Gambling Commission steps up and says, well, you failed to actually consider the AML risks. Do you think that's because operators have been fooled by legitimate players, or is it because they've fallen victim to those specific, bad actors that are coming together and purposefully undermining? And I'm asking this because most of the recent complaints by the UK GC, for example, have been mostly about, internal processes not doing, their job too well. So, which also could be a reason. The reason why this is the most common mistake is that companies such as Sumsub, for example, are saying they're ahead of the game. They're notifying people about the dangers and so on. But what do you think is missing right now in how operators deal with AML? And do you think that there is always going to be a room for genuine mistakes, or can your solution, your platform actually tie it all together and say, no, there is no need to let even one customer, go outside of these AML tracks and checks?
Again, several very good questions in it. First of all, of course, there will always be both errors and there will always be some percentage of people get through. This is just a statistical fact, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you want 100% accuracy, that means your conversion should go to zero. You don't approve anybody, you don't make any mistakes. So obviously, it's always a balance. And that balance depends also on the risk profile, which is why it's very important. Like using our tools, you can understand what a risk of a potential customer is and apply different measures to them. So again, for example, if the type of a game that they're playing is, I don't know, low risk, low value, low potential for fraudulent activity, you don't need to overburden them with, very onerous checks, right? If it's the other way, it's, it's a game with, high stakes, lots of money being moved and high potential for fraud, then of course you need to do more of these checks. And actually giving that flexibility is something that is very useful to the companies. So I wouldn't say that, and then operators can be fooled by legitimate people kind of going astray, or they can be fooled by fraudsters. I mean, that's a tug of war that happens. Like fraudsters are always ahead of the game because they're organized and they are looking for holes in whatever system exists. And our life is to make it as difficult as possible, which is why I think there's a lot of synergy in us working with a lot of clients and seeing all of that information. Again, I don't think companies are being lazy about this or anything. It's just, as I said, they are focusing on their core business. Of course, compliance is an extremely important matter for them, but at the same time, they always put business first, and that's the right way to do. But they need to also understand the risks that they face, the potential consequences from the regulator side, fines, publicity, security. All of these are a concern. I think it's just a natural evolution of the industry. You focused on one thing and the growth first, then the regulator finds some mistakes, imposes more strict controls. You need to kind of up your game and compliance. So I don't think there's anything untoward here. I think it's a natural progression of the industry. But again, I think that's why our tools are evolving to give them this kind of better functionality easier.
Yeah, that actually that makes that's very comprehensive. I have another question for you, Dan. That's based on what you mentioned, the evolution of the industry. So if we go 12 years back, the focus wasn't so much on compliance. It was on B2C and customer acquisition. It was just the nature of the game, as it were. And then regulators started stepping in. And there have been several major changes in European markets, in Germany, in Finland, in Sweden, in the UK right now, obviously in the United States. So my question has to that we've reached a point where regulators are a little more strict about what they expect from businesses in terms of compliance. They've said, okay, so the right way to do it is to make sure that, let's say, KYC and AML checks are carried out right away. And I'm asking this question because Sumsub has a really quick onboarding time. You say it's easy to onboard a new customer. It should not be obtrusive, but at the same time, there have been genuine concerns amongst legitimate operators. They say, well, if you do that, if you introduce such kind of checks, then the channelization is going to go down, the black market is going to go up. And so I just wanted to pick your brain about that from your position, working with, like regulators, because you need to make sure that your clients are compliant, and with operators who are coming to you and saying, Ilya, those are our fears. What about that? Why is there a discrepancy, perhaps, on that point?
But again, I don't necessarily see it as a discrepancy.
Mm-hmm.
You can think about it as a pendulum, right? As you rightly said, companies were initially focused on customer acquisition and B2C and growth, which means that, it attracted, certain profiles, attracted fraud, certain lacks of controls became apparent, and that got the regulators' attention, and they're focusing on this to make sure this doesn't happen. Does it happen that the pendulum swings too far? That's always the case. But I think if businesses can prove to the regulators that they're being prudent, that whatever risk-based approaches they're applying are working, then I think also the regulator will be much in a much better place. Let's put it this way. So as I mentioned, like we work a lot with crypto companies that have gone through a similar journey. 5-7 years ago, KYC was potentially an afterthought or something they were doing as a check the box exercise. Again, unlike actually gambling, which have to have a license somewhere, most crypto operators weren't actually located anywhere or licensed anywhere. So no particular regulator could actually go after them. So they operated in almost a vacuum. But what has happened over the last 5 years, actually, many national regulators have focused. They developed frameworks for when they want to regulate specific players. They develop frameworks that you need to apply in terms of risk controls and AML policies and all of that. And you can see now it works. Obviously, different countries have a different approach. You've all seen the case of kind of US regulation by enforcement. EU is much more regulation by legislation. Both approaches work with different consequences, but in the end, I think it's a similar profile. I don't think there's anything untoward going in the gaming industry, other than it's an industry that has a potential to attract a lot of attention from the bad actors, and that's why it has more work to do to fight that.
All right. So, okay, yeah, I agree. That's very insightful again. So in a sense, those mandatory checks or whatever the decision is going to be, the industry is going to figure it out in the end with the help of companies such as Sumsub. Okay, and there's been one other hot topic because we've been talking about fraudsters and bad actors. And actually, if we look at 2023, I think the number of incidents involving cybersecurity has shot up, mostly in the United States. We've seen a couple of big online operators, not too many, one crypto casino, a big brand, again, suffering from such incidents. And so I was just wondering where Sumsub stands on that. I think a lot of what you do is about making sure that once a player onboards, he's not part of this fraudulent network. But are you also working or thinking about those cybersecurity challenges that we've seen in 2023, that they impact both the land-based and online casino industry? And surprisingly, they target land-based more than online casinos until now, I think.
When you talk about security, do you mean the personal data security breaches, or because there are two things. One thing that a lot in 2023, what we've seen is actually because of the proliferation of technology, very capable AI. For example, in online, we've seen a lot of instances of people using deepfakes
Yes.
to pass these onboarding procedures.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an example of actually where providers like us need to really stay ahead of the game. And we've been at the forefront of this. We have an in-house AI team that develops tools to fight. I mean, we use AI throughout the whole process, but in particular, the most recent challenges with deepfakes, AI-generated deepfakes, is something that is very hard for many players to do. We have, probably the leading instrument to be able to detect deepfakes, and we've seen that, that frequency increase almost more than tenfold actually over the last year. So yeah, we are investing a lot in that. But it will be the case, whatever the technology is, it will keep developing. In the next couple of years, we might see new challenges, and we will keep investing to make sure that we're at the forefront. From a data security point of view, obviously, we deal with personal data, take it extremely seriously, follow GDPR rules, use encryption everywhere. Knock on wood, haven't had any issues with that, but this is the core of our business, and that's why we take it extremely, extremely seriously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I understand. Okay. And one thing to probably wrap up. Now that your full cycle platform is up, have you been satisfied with the results so far? Has it been well received? It's been a couple of months, and
definitely was very well received. For sure, for many players, it means almost kind of a change in philosophy of how they approach these procedures, because such a comprehensive tool is available. And we've seen a lot of operators and platforms also looking at integrating it and providing it out of the box. So, for example, platforms would integrate us so that all the operators using the platform could actually use this. So yes, we've seen a lot of interest. I think the way for us to continue developing here is to tailor further and further the use cases, whether it's on a particular risk profile, whether it's based on regulatory requirements of different jurisdictions, limits, extra regulations, responsible gambling, and so on and so forth. So that's, we have the whole platform. We've developed already the tools that players and operators can use, and now we're investing into making them more and more nuanced.
Okay, and so one interesting thing that comes up is what we speak about fraud in the gambling industry, but what types of fraud are there in the gambling industry based on yeah.
Yeah, look, I mean, there are some types that are typical for other industries, but in particular in gaming, there are some that are specific. Obviously, multi-accounting, identity theft are big areas, as well as account takeovers, and then on fraud that happens after the fact and that pattern. So we develop multiple tools to fight those types of fraud. So player profiling is one tool where we can build a very comprehensive risk profile of the player based on their onboarding data, demographic data, device data, location, and lots of signals that we can detect at the time of onboarding, but also we then enrich this customer's risk profile as they interact with the system. And that is a much better way to profile the customer and basically tailor whatever controls offerings you can have for them. In responsible gambling, as I said, that's a whole separate set of tools where we develop rules that comply with certain local regulations around how much they can stay, gamble, how long, and so on. So that's another area. And in terms of multi-accounting and account takeover, those are the types of fraud that we catch with multiple signals that we see throughout. It can be, again, based on location, based on devices used, based on known fraud networks that we detect elsewhere. So I think that's why it's a comprehensive solution, to be able to detect it, but also to be able to then verify very easily and securely whether the person that you suspect might not be the person who you think you are, who they pose to be, are themselves or not. So, for example, it can be a quick liveness test where we can detect that's a real person, not a deep fake, that is using the account, the same actually appearance of a person who were onboarded. And those are very, very important tools. And the trick is that you can apply them with very, very low friction, which doesn't, hurt your business, doesn't hurt the customer experience.
Yeah, that's very interesting. As you say, it's low friction. This being low friction and the threats actually getting, let's say, bigger by the month, if not by the week. What do you think is still stopping some businesses from saying we need this tool, we need to have what Sumsub has to offer, or if that Sumsub, another company. But basically, do you think it's lack of awareness of what companies like Sumsub do, or do you think it's a lack of awareness of what the real risks are, or is the industry actually aware and they just need to maybe a bit of a wake-up call?
Well, I think, as I mentioned before, of course, traditionally, the business should be focused on their business. So it's the regulator's role to either set the rules or to set the rules and enforce the rules. And of course, regulatory action is that what provides the wake-up call. But I do agree with you that a lot of times businesses would do the minimum that's necessary in the common circumstance, which means that they wouldn't be looking out for the solutions or trying to develop solutions themselves. So yes, when something happens in the industry, regulatory action or certain scandals or breaches, that's when they start paying more attention. And I think that's why we really want to popularize the idea that you can have a full platform rather than employ individual solutions, because employing multiple solutions means you invest more. Actually, you do more integrations. It's more difficult to maintain them all, and you lose a lot of data in between those systems because you have to maintain it, invest in resources in something that, as I mentioned before, is not the core of your business. So we really hope that the message is spread and more participants in the market realize that they can rely on us. Of course, on other providers as well, but I think in particular on us and the platform we've built to cover them in multiple situations.
I see. Okay, and what does Sumsub predicts are going to be the main challenges for what you do in 2024? Is it going to be a dramatic shift in regulation, specifically in the gaming industry, or is it going to be new challenges, as you say, AI deepfakes are going to increase perhaps, or it's going to be just a combination of all as it always has been?
Yeah, I think both. Look, I think the fact that the AI revolution, if you can call it, happened so quickly that I think lots of participants in the market have been kind of caught off guard that you can so quickly and so easily and cheaply create such great tools of deception, whether it's visual, deepfakes, audio. And so I think that means that a lot of the participants need to kind of rethink their approaches from, again, platforms, operators, regulators, providers like us. So I think 24 will continue to be a lot driven by AI, and I think there will be and threats coming from AI, and also use of AI tools in fighting those threats. And I cannot stress enough that it's the whole point of us having a 360 platform is that you cannot efficiently fight those threats by looking at different separate points and by employing point solutions. You truly need to look at the whole user life cycle and have a 360 view of the customer to understand that they might not be who they claim to be, or they might not be behaving in the way you think they should be behaving. So I think what we've developed is actually a very potent tool specifically for these threats. And the regulators will obviously be paying very, very close attention to this, as this is a huge potential area of risk.
But do you think that they are already regulators? Are they properly assessing those risks? Because right now, if I look at regulation, there is a lot of, as you said, there is a lot, people are hassling over whether they should increase the tax, whether they should ban advertisement, whether we should have tighter and more demanding compliance checks. But are regulators actually taking a step back and saying, oh, by the way, we actually have to address this? Because earlier you said that, you know, at one point operators get too caught up in addressing a certain problem, and we might end in a situation where regulators are too focused on a certain funnel, and then and by the way, there is also the cybersecurity incidents and the challenges of AI and so on. Do you think regulators are catching up fast enough, or is it as perhaps always been the private sector leading the way and regulation coming after?
It's always, I think, a work between market participants, so players and operators and providers, regulators and us as service providers. So I think and it happens in many others. So of course, it's hard for legislators and regulators to stay ahead. They are by nature more reactive, and also the tools that they have at their disposal are more limited, right? They can only, either do regulation or enforcement. So, but I think we've certainly seen regulators in certain countries being much more forward-looking in this. We're working with some regulators, sort of coming back to the topic of AI and deepfakes. We've been working with some regulators specifically, and actually international intergovernmental bodies as well, to educate them of what threats we see, what tools are available to fight them, because it's never one tool fits all. And so, yeah, we can be a part of that dialogue and hopefully help them to get quicker up to the moment and know what the tools are and decide what the best approach to deal with them is.
That's very interesting. You actually beat me to it. I was going to ask you if regulators and have actually shown interest, say, hey, Sumsub, can you actually help us advise on this framework and what we're missing? Yeah.
Definitely. I'll give you like a small example. There was a UN report recently on fraud, and we were quoted in that report.
Yes. Yeah.
So actually, some of the work we do in the public domain has already been noted. But then, as I mentioned, certain regulators and intergovernmental sort of agencies have reached out to us directly because they want to understand what sort of trends we see, what tools we can offer, and technologies to employ to be able to detect those fraud. Because for them, it's not an issue of a particular industry. For them, it be sometimes a much broader issue around even national security,
Yes.
in the time of elections, in the time of wars, these technologies can actually affect much broader issues in society. So they're very focused on understanding how to be prepared to deal with those challenges.
It's very interesting. And speaking of, because you mentioned that regulators are as a whole looking at bad actor trends. So does your experience in other sectors such as fintech, crypto overlap with what you do in gambling? Like, is it informing your decision, or do you say, oh, we have to start clean and just see what's...
For sure. And that's why I say we're working across crypto, gambling, traditional fintechs, and actually lots of non-regulated businesses that don't do this because they are required to, but because they want to manage their risks, actually give us a very, very good picture of what the trends are, what the risks are, and the different tools to fight them. Obviously, gaming has their particular regulations and specifics around, again, things like responsible gambling. But in general, for sure, there's a lot of synergy in us working across those sectors. As I mentioned, we can see certain fraud patterns in one sector and then prevent them in another before they actually come. Because what organized fraudsters, what they do is they look for any place where they can find a hole in security and do what they want to do. So yes, for sure, there's a lot of synergy between different sectors.
I see. Well, Ilya, thank you so much for this conversation. And hopefully we'll speak soon again. Everybody, this has been another episode of Gambling News video interviews here with Ilya Brovin, Chief Growth Officer at Sumsub. Thank you.
Yes, Boyan, it was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure as well.